G'day, today on Garage It Yourself, I'm going to be showing you how to install lowering adjusters on your torsion beam style suspension. So let's do it. Welcome back to Garage It Yourself, the channel dedicated to the DIY car enthusiast doing things on a budget. Today I'm going to be taking a look at how you can fit adjusters to your torsion beam style suspension. These particular types of suspension are fitted to many vehicles, but for me it's the VW, the Beetle, the Karmann Ghia, the Thing, the 181, and they're the exact same thing, but just larger in scale for your bus. Like I said, just slightly larger in size. Anyhow, you get two different types of adjuster to be able to fit to the torsion style beam. The one I'm going to be using is called Avis adjuster, and the other one is called a sway-away. Both the Avis and the sway-away adjuster do the same thing, just in a slightly different fashion, and that being that they allow the collar that sits in the middle of the beam that retains the leaf springs, they allow it to rotate, which then, depending on which way you're going up or down, will raise or lower the vehicle. The sway-away comes with one of these already with inside it, and you cut out the tube and then you weld in the sway-away. The Avis adjuster uses a couple of toothed plates as the adjustment mechanism. One plate welds to the tube and then the other one screws into the central collar, and then that allows adjustment of the beam. The brand of adjuster I went with is CSP from Germany, Custom Speed Parts. Very good quality stuff from these guys. Made in Germany as far as I'm aware. It doesn't come with the central collar like the MP stuff does, but I'm not a fan of the quality of MP stuff, so I'd prefer using the original collar and better quality adjuster. I believe CIP1 in America also make a similar product to CSP without the central collar. Bit more expensive than what the MP stuff is, but from a longevity point of view, I think this will do a better job. Now, the first thing you want to do is actually check your legislation for what is actually allowable as a modification on your suspension, because here in Australia we're not allowed to use sway-aways, not legally anyway, because basically cutting through the beam and then welding in the adjuster is a big no-no. That kind of modification is not allowed to be done, whereas welding on the Avis style adjuster, that is allowed. If your legislation allows you to be able to fit the sway-aways, then I highly suggest you do, because they are far easier to fit than what the Avis adjusters are. You might think just welding this on the outside looks pretty simple and straightforward, but unfortunately that's not the case, because as you can see on the collar, there's these large dimples, 180 degrees from either side, and they match up with, from the factory, once this is in place, it then gets crimped top and bottom by a big hydraulic press or clamp, and that deforms the metal of the tube, and this is 4mm thick steel, into those dimples, and that holds everything in place, and then everything, the leaf spring will be able to rotate around that without the collar moving. And the reason why the sway-away is so much quicker and easier to fit than what these Avis adjusters is because of trying to release the dimpling from the collar. When I asked CSP how you go about releasing the collar from the dimpling of the tube, their response to that was that you had to crack it free. By cracking free, what they actually mean is twatting it really hard with a sledgehammer. And I'm not joking, the biggest one you can find, because it's going to take a lot of force to get this thing to shift. You're also going to require some kind of makeshift drift. This is 33mm thick wall tubing. It's 4mm thick tubing, 33mm in diameter. This is just big enough to be able to fit down through the needle and micarta bushings that are in either end and be able to sit on the collar. As you can see, it's deformed quite a lot, and you can see the fast forward footage of me twatting the collar backwards and forwards to actually get it to release. One thing to be aware of is the steel of the beam is over 30 years old, so it's very set in its ways, and the dimpling is quite deep. So just knocking it backwards and forwards, you do run the risk of splitting the tube, which obviously could either scrap your beam or you'd have to re-weld it at the minimum. So to help it get out of its own way, I used my blowtorch just to gently heat the area. Oxyacetylene, fine, you just want to like heat it up just to help make the steel that little bit more malleable so it'll get out of its own way a bit easier. So yeah, just something to keep in mind when you're doing this modification. You don't want to cause yourself more problems, and a bit of heat certainly helps with such thick metal to get it to shift around a bit easier. Once you've got the collar free from its central location, to be able to remove it so that you can dress the bruising that's occurred, you're going to have to end up driving out the micarta bushing and the needle bearing that reside in the ends of the tubes. Now, unfortunately, because of the bruising that's happened to the collar, there's a strong likelihood that you're going to damage, if not the micarta bearing, then also the needle bearing. So this job, as you can see here, this one got completely destroyed. And some of the needle bearings also got dented on their caging. So as you can see, this job can actually end up costing more than just what the adjusters are worth, because you may well end up having to replace all of the micarta bushings and all of the bearings. They're not all that expensive, especially if you're in America, getting them from Wolfsburg West. But from a budget point of view, it's going to like incur some additional costs. I don't think it can be avoided. But once you've actually managed to release it from the dimpling, that's not the end of the story. Oh no, because of the construction of the central collar, where it's got the grooves that line up with the dimpling, the sides of the groove are actually quite thin steel compared to the thickness of the tubing. Therefore, the collar deforms quite badly. So therefore, the inside of the tube where the dimpling is not actually going to be the overall diameter of the collar, and the inside diameter of the tube needs to be the outside diameter of the collar for it to be able to rotate, because it will get to the point as you try to adjust it that it will start coming up against the overall diameter of the collar and it'll lock up and you won't be able to move it any further. So to be able to get the inside diameter of the dimpling to the outside diameter of the collar, you have to clean up the bruising and deformation of the collar and then rotate it 90 degrees and put it back in, and then it's more sledgehammer time. And again, you have to knock it backwards and forwards as many times as possible until you feel that it is moving quite freely backwards and forwards through the dimpled area. And you'd think that's it then. Yay, you're done. But wait, there's more. Due to how the dimple has been forced back out, it doesn't force the bottom of the dimple like flush with the surface of the steel tube. Oh no, you end up with a double ridge. That double ridge then means that your adjuster plate is not going to sit flush against the tube, which it needs to be welded. So as you can see here, it rocks because of that double ridge. So what that means is you then have to put the collar back in, and I suggest doing this on the side that doesn't have the grub screw in it, because what you're then going to have to do is, with the collar in place, you're then going to have to use a large hammer to hammer the dimple as flat as possible. I mean, you could just go ahead and grind it flush, but I don't like the idea of doing that because if you actually go through and do this whole process, the double ridge of the dimpling actually ends up sitting quite proud by at least a couple of millimeters, if not more. So if you grind it flat to be able to fit the adjuster plate on, in that area you could well have a millimeter or less of material left, which from a strength perspective is not a good thing. So like it says, put the collar back in place and then beat it with a hammer to flatten it as much as possible, and then you're going to have to knock the collar backwards and forwards again, and then like hit it again, and basically get it to a point where it's able to move backwards and forwards like nice and freely, but it's also going to be as flat as possible on the outside diameter of the tube. Once you've finished hammering and dressing the dimples flat so that your adjuster plate sits nice and flush against the tube, you then want to just mark out the adjuster slot, because if you don't mark out the adjuster slot and cut it, you're not going to be able to adjust your beam. And then with it marked out, I just used a step drill to go up to 14 mil for the bottom, and then I used an angle grinder on a slitting disc and joined the two holes together. Then, because there's a bit of thread left in the tube from where the old grub screw used to sit, I just used my Dremel with a carbide burr on it and just got rid of the threading, but you can use a round file to be able to do that easy enough. And then you just want to check to make sure that your new grub screw is able to move within inside the slot nice and freely and it doesn't bind anywhere. And once you've checked all that, then the last thing to do is to weld your adjuster plate on. Now I'm just going to use a couple of tack welds to hold it in place, because although I think my welder has got enough guts to be able to get the penetration, I want to make sure that it is on there properly. So I'm going to take it to a licensed welder and get them to do it, because at the end of the day this is a safety critical item of your vehicle and you don't want the welds to fail, therefore causing the suspension to collapse and you having a nasty accident. So choice is yours on that one, but like it says, for me, I'm going to tack it in place and take it to a licensed welder and get them to do the seam welding all the way around the adjuster. And with that all done, you will then have an adjustable beam. So I hope you found that useful. I couldn't find anywhere online an actual tutorial of how to fit the Avis style adjuster, so at least now there is. If you liked what I get up to, then please hit that like button. If you like what I get up to on my channel, please subscribe. It does help me out. And if you think anyone that you know is going to be interested, then please share it around. And if you live somewhere that allows the use of sway-away adjusters, you lucky buggers. Okay, thanks for watching. See you next time.